What's worse, knowing what happened to your loved one or not having any clue at all? I'm sure it's not an easy side to pick. Some people want closure, and as painful as it may be, they want to know the harrowing details when it comes to homicide investigations. But some can't comprehend knowing what their loved one went through in their final moments, and for them, ignorance is bliss. The Smith family was desperately trying to find answers about their newly married son's disappearance back in 2005. George was on his honeymoon with his wife, Jennifer, and they just got married 11 days before this tragic event. Investigators quickly narrowed things down to two possibilities, either an accident or foul play. But obviously, this didn't really give George's family any sort of answers. When you add to this all the various twists, such as untrustworthy people also being on this vacation, as well as an unexpected murder investigation, well, it leaves a lot of questions unanswered. The most important being, where is George Smith? Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. No AI narrations, no fake drama, just true crime. So if you're into that kind of thing, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It's totally free and it just lets you know when I post new videos. George Allen Smith IV was born on October 3rd, 1978 in Glenville, Connecticut, to parents George Sr. and Maureen. The Smith family owned a liquor store called Coe's Cobb Liquors, and it was run by George's dad. It was a very successful business, and it was a pretty famous place in the Greenwich area. But it was more than just a store or a business for the Smiths in the community. It was a family of sorts, and all of the workers and customers basically knew each other. It was a 38-year-old business venture, and it was the reason why the Smiths could live comfortably, have food on the table, and pay for their children's education. George attended Babson College in Massachusetts after graduating from Greenwich High School. At college, he studied business. He continued to work in Boston as a computer data mining analyst for a couple of years, and it's safe to say that George was very smart and driven. Even though George grew up with everything he wanted, he wasn't a spoiled rich kid. He was very down to earth and hardworking. Now, George loved working in Boston, as it was competitive, challenging, and fun, but his heart was still at home. So he decided to quit his job and come back home to manage the family business. George had a great teacher too, his dad, and under his supervision, George became a pretty decent store manager. Fast forward to 2002. George was at a reunion with his friends where he crossed paths with Jennifer Hagel. She was an elementary school teacher and also had lived in Connecticut all of her life. George and Jennifer, they immediately clicked. They were like two puzzle pieces meant to come together, and so it wasn't long until the pair started dating. George's family also loved Jennifer. She was beautiful, young, and an ambitious woman who completed George in every way. 3 years into the relationship, George and Jennifer got married at the Castle Hill Inn overlooking the water. Their wedding ceremony was like it was ripped straight from the pages of a fairy tale, and it was a blissful day for everyone. After the wedding, like every couple, Jennifer and George had their honeymoon planned. It was a cruise trip, and they decided to go with Royal Caribbean International. It was a 2-week Mediterranean cruise, having scheduled stops in Greece, Turkey, and Italy, among other picturesque and out-of-this-world locations cutting through the Aegean Sea. The couple boarded the MS Brilliance of the Seas from Barcelona on June 29th, ready to enjoy their first days as newlyweds in the middle of the ocean. But this honeymoon would be anything but dreamy and romantic. Rather, it would become a nightmare that would ruin George's family forever, sending them on a decades-long search for their son who vanished from the ship, surrounded by clear blue, yet dangerously deep waters. Watching true crime videos like this, it's easy to get caught up in the suspense and drama and forget that these are real people who are put through real tragedy. It's easy for us to disconnect from situations like this and think, well, that would never happen to me. But the sad truth is, everyone thinks they're safe until they're not. For example, Bank of America recently revealed that they had a massive data breach that compromised the private information of thousands of people. But the real kicker is, they didn't tell any of these victims for months. But this isn't an outlier situation either. In fact, on average, most companies take an average of 277 days before revealing a data breach. That's an almost entire year. This means that your personal information, possibly your banking info or otherwise, may be floating out there for months before you even know about it. What's really scary is that crimes like this are taking place all the time. Just in the last year or so, Bank of America, JP Morgan, and Chase all announced massive data breaches. Your bank could even be involved in a breach right now and you would never know unless they tell you. And do you really want to give a criminal a 9-month head start on stealing your info and money? Well, that's why I teamed up with Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura will let you know if they ever find your phone number, email, or even social security number on the dark web or any place else for that matter. They let you know incredibly quickly if someone ever tries to use your credit cards or bank accounts without your permission. Not only this, but they believe so strongly in the power of their services that they even offer a $5 million identity theft insurance policy in the event that something terrible happens while your information is under their surveillance. They also have tons of other features packed inside of their app, and it's really a one-stop shop for your privacy and peace of mind in today's interconnected world. You can go to aura.com/tieknots to try Aura for 14 days for free. This is more than enough time to find out if any of your information has been exposed, and you'll learn about these threats long before your financial institution tells you about them. I highly recommend doing this right now, because if you wait until one of your financial companies informs you, well, 1, it's too late, and 2, they're probably just going to offer you free credit monitoring and send you on your way. Signing up for credit monitoring after your finances have been stolen, it's like setting up a security camera after you've been robbed. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, I don't know about you, but I choose to not leave my family vulnerable to threats like this. So if you'd also like to make sure that you and your family are protected, give Aura a try by visiting aura.com/tieknots for your 2-week free trial. July 5th was a calm sea day, and the cruise ship was sailing through the waters of the Aegean Sea towards its next destination. At around 8 a.m., a passenger on deck 7 looked out of her window, hoping to catch a beautiful view of the sea and the sun in perfect harmony. But what caught her eye was not blue and yellow, but a haunting and seemingly never-ending smear of red on the ship's canopy. Luckily, she didn't brush this incident off, and she reported it to the cabin staff immediately. Not long after, the passengers on board the cruise ship were freaked out and terrified that a passenger may have gone overboard. A while later, the captain of the ship went into the room where the blood was trailing from, and it was the fateful cabin of 9062. And they didn't know it by then, but this was Jennifer and George's cabin. Well, the captain entered the room, and it didn't take him long to realize that something had happened here. The whole room was trashed. Everything was on the floor, the bed was messed up, things were strewn everywhere, and it looked like the place had been ransacked. There were footprints on the cabin floor, and right by the balcony, a chair was flush against the glass railing, which was pretty unusual. The glass was also smeared with what investigators would later describe as a hip impression. It was as if someone was perched by the hip on the railing, dangerously close to the edge of the ship. Moreover, the bed sheets also had 2 very significant red marks, each about 2 centimeters long. This blood sadly tested positive for George. There were also red marks in various other places, including the ship's awning. But the couple in cabin 9062 were nowhere to be found. If that wasn't enough, the sight of red leading from the balcony door alarmed everyone, and they knew that whatever went down in this cabin on deck 7 was horrific. They just didn't know what it was that happened. But first, they had to find the occupants of the cabin, and they quickly found out that Jennifer and George Smith were staying there. 2 hours later, there was still no sign of 26-year-old George, but Jennifer was eventually found. She was at the spa indulging in a pre-booked massage. When the captain and other crew members alerted Jennifer of her husband's disappearance, she was genuinely shocked and concerned. Jennifer had not seen George since the night before, and now he was gone, leaving behind a very eerie trail of unanswered questions. A couple of hours into the discovery of the ransacked cabin, at around noon, the Turkish authorities were called onto the ship to begin the investigation of George's disappearance. Since Jennifer was the only one who was with George that night before, the investigators wanted to question her for details. They also checked security cameras and were able to piece together what had happened the night before. In the police's eyes, Jennifer's behavior was out of the ordinary. She had not seen George since the night before, and when she woke up the next day, instead of searching for her husband, she went to the spa, which honestly should have been the last thing on her mind. Even so, the police wanted to know who the couple interacted with the night before. In their eyes, everyone who was with George needed to be spoken to. Jennifer claimed that she and George struck up a conversation with another American passenger, 20-year-old Josh Askin, as soon as they boarded the ship. The trio went to different places and enjoyed the first 4 to 5 days together, exploring exotic towns, eating delicious foods, and just taking in all the beauty. According to Jennifer, on the night of July 4th, the couple and Josh decided to go to the casino. And there, Josh and George were entertaining themselves while Jennifer was playing poker. They also went to a disco afterward. That night, they had a lot to drink and lost tons of money at poker. Investigators also checked the security footage, and the last sighting of George was at around 2:30 a.m. in the casino. But tragically, he wasn't seen after that. The investigators knew that they had to question Josh to corroborate Jennifer's version of events. And when they found him, well, Josh had a lot to say about that night. First of all, Josh said that Jennifer and George didn't leave the disco together. Jennifer was with the casino manager, Lloyd, and they were getting pretty comfy in each other's presence at the casino, even in front of George, Jennifer's husband of just a few days. Security cameras also showed Jennifer staggering out of the ship's disco at around 3:30 a.m., leaving George with his new friends. And interestingly enough, Lloyd's keycard showed that he came back to his room at about 3:25 a.m. Now, this led the detectives to become very suspicious of Jennifer and Lloyd. Their stories were completely different, and they seemed to be more than just friends. Were the two together after leaving the disco? What was going on? The investigators were very confused. But now things were about to get even more complex when 3 more people entered the investigation. They were Greg and Zach Rosenberg, both of whom were cousins, and a friend of theirs named Rusty. 19-year-old Greg was the one playing poker with Jennifer, and the rest of the gang was with George and Josh. The trio also joined the group to the disco after the casino. The 3 men were Russian, but they had American passports and were living in New York at the time. Now, the group of young men also had too much to drink, and they were being very loud and obnoxious. The ship's crew were instructed to not serve more alcohol to these men or deliver it to their rooms, but that didn't stop Zach, Greg, and Rusty because they'd smuggled a bottle of absinthe with the help of George. See, the trio had purchased this absinthe when they were docked in Greece, and since passengers, especially underage ones, weren't allowed to bring alcohol on board, George helped them out by hiding the bottle in his shorts. Now, something you need to know about absinthe is that it is very strong. The alcohol level in this particular bottle was anywhere from 40 to 70%. It's illegal in Europe, but the composition is highly regulated by European Union standards, so the trio, George and even Josh, downed a lot of absinthe, and this didn't go unnoticed by the crew on the ship, including a janitor. The trio, Josh and George, consumed a lot of alcohol that night, but it wasn't just the guys. Jennifer was also drunk by the end of it all, especially after 2:30 a.m. She was very disoriented, as is evidenced by the security cameras when she was seen at 3:30. Several witnesses saw her leaning on Lloyd and even having a physical altercation with George, which ended with her striking George pretty hard. Now, it's unclear whether George and Jennifer were bickering or if they were just wiped out drunk, but Jennifer did leave the disco at 3:30 a.m. and was assisted to the elevator by the same janitor who saw the guys consuming the absinthe. But this was where investigators noticed something weird. Cabin 9062 was located at the left of the elevator on deck 7. But Jennifer went the other way, making a right, and she was eventually found asleep in the hallway. She was so inebriated that she had to be wheeled in a wheelchair to her room by a female officer and 2 guards. When Jennifer and the guards entered the cabin a little before 5 a.m., it was eerily quiet, and the curtains were completely drawn. While the police were figuring everything out, they were approached by another couple right next to cabin 9062, and they admitted to hearing a scuffle next door. The couple was sleeping when they heard shouting, the movement of furniture, footsteps, rustling, and finally a loud thud. It all happened at 4 a.m., before Jennifer was even wheeled back into the cabin. The couple did report this incident to guest services, and the man next door also opened his door and stepped into the hallway after this, and he saw 3 men standing there but was unable to identify any of them. Other witnesses and passengers also heard the noticeable thud noise, along with a woman's scream, but there weren't any eyewitness reports that a woman was inside the cabin. They only saw 4 men entering the cabin, but after this weird incident, only 3 came out. This detail left everyone wondering. Did something happen to George Before Jennifer was wheeled into the room, was he with the 3 Russian guys that he met at the casino? And did George fall accidentally, or was he pushed? The investigators were highly suspicious of the 3 men who met the young couple at the casino. George's keycard showed that Greg, Zach, and Rusty entered cabin 9062 at around 4:05 a.m., and after the couple next door saw the 3 men in the hallway, they went somewhere else. The most tragic part about all of this is that George's body could not be recovered. It was impossible, and without a body, convicting someone for murder or foul play would be hard. There are several theories out there as to what might have happened to George on that fateful night. The first and most believable one is that it was a robbery gone wrong. It's believed that Zach, Greg, and Rusty were looking for naive travelers and had plans to rob them by earning their trust and getting them severely drunk. Also, it didn't go unnoticed that George was sporting a very expensive watch, which was a gift from Jennifer, and Jennifer had a huge and insanely expensive engagement ring. Moreover, witnesses stated that George and Jennifer didn't shy away from boasting about their wealth, and they had tens of thousands of dollars with them. And this is never a smart move. If you've got money, please don't act like it, or my next video might be about you. So it is possible that the trio got wind of this, and they purposefully made George and Jennifer consume a lot of alcohol and absinthe to wipe them out completely. Also, the cabin was completely trashed. Maybe they were looking for money. If you remember the 2-centimeter long red stains on the sheets, well, detectives say that these were consistent with someone forcefully pulling on George's watch. The second theory has to do with a freak accident. Truth is, the group of men got drunk to the point of no return. So it is possible that George, while trying to get bearings of his surroundings, just fell overboard and no one could save him. The group was drinking absinthe with high levels of alcohol and thujo, an active hallucinogen. But since the absinthe was purchased in Europe, which has stricter regulations in the composition of absinthe with tolerable levels of thujone, this theory is not as believable since it can't be backed up by evidence. But in the meantime, the FBI also joined the investigation, and their main focus was to interview everyone who was with George and Jennifer on that fateful night. Josh and Jennifer took polygraph tests, and even though Jennifer passed, Josh failed the test. What was very bizarre was that a videotape of the 3 Russians also surfaced, in which they were joking about the incident, saying things like, quote, "We gave him a lesson in paragliding without a parachute." They were also heard repeatedly saying, "We never saw him, end of story." It's such a weird thing to say, especially considering the paragliding detail points towards the fact that George may have fallen overboard. And what is it with that second statement? Obviously, the men were with George that night. Multiple witnesses saw them. So how they expected investigators to believe that they weren't there that night, no one knows. But anyway, in 2009, the FBI questioned the 4 men, including Josh, and weirdly enough, Zach and Josh were very vague and continually invoked the Fifth Amendment right, which granted them the right to not testify in court. Only Greg was forthcoming with information, but even that info was quite ambiguous. According to Greg, the men ordered room service that night, which was their only form of an alibi. Now, this was weird in itself because the cruise ship staff were instructed not to serve the men anything else that evening, and it seems that this rule included serving them food. To add to this oddness, Greg doesn't remember who ordered the room service, he just knows that it was ordered at some point. What Greg knew for sure was that everyone was highly inebriated. Even though Greg's version of events was also pretty choppy, he did say one thing with certainty, and that was the fact that whatever happened to George wasn't accidental. He didn't explain further, but he did say that something crazy happened that fateful night that would soon be uncovered. But he wouldn't live long enough to guide the FBI, because in December of 2019, Greg was found murdered in front of his home inside of his car after being hit at close range with multiple rounds. What's so eerie is that Greg's death still remains unsolved to this day. I mean, it's oddly convenient. Greg says something about George's death getting uncovered soon, and then he mysteriously and inexplicably turns up dead. It's just something you can't shrug off like it's no big deal. The tragic and unexplainable disappearance of George Smith shook his family to the core. When they got that terrifying phone call from detectives that George had likely gone overboard, the Smith family could not believe what they were hearing. Having your son go missing is terrifying, but on another continent, and probably in the vast, deep waters of the ocean, that's another level of hopelessness. The Smith family made sure that the authorities felt the pressure to solve this case quickly and give justice to George, but it wasn't that easy. They made appeals to the public. They offered a $100,000 reward for any information on George's disappearance to solve the case. And the Smith family also pushed for boycotting Royal Caribbean International for their disinterest in solving George's disappearance, since the cruise company tried to keep everything hush-hush, and they even disturbed the cabin, quite possibly a crime scene, by cleaning up all of the evidence within hours of George's disappearance, which is just unbelievable. It's believed that the cruise company simply didn't want to get bad press because of all this. The Smith family also suspected Jennifer. In their eyes, she was too cool, calm, and collected. It also didn't help that she wasn't looking for her husband the next morning and chose to go to the spa instead. But if I'm being honest, I don't really think this is too bizarre. I mean, Jennifer was almost certainly having one heck of a hangover. Yes, the room was trashed and she would have noticed this, but it was a long night for them both. The room was bound to be trashed. I just don't think it's too much of a leap to say that she simply didn't notice the spots of blood on the sheets, got dressed, and went out for her spa day to help lessen her hangover, but that's just my opinion. Regardless, for a long time, Jennifer was a prime suspect in the eyes of the Smith family. But strangely, Jennifer did appear pretty tight-lipped about the incident. She wouldn't share any information about the incident publicly. But again, in Jennifer's defense, the FBI told her not to say anything to the press, so she was just following orders. The Smith family also couldn't contain their surprise when Jennifer agreed to settle the matter with the cruise company for just $1 million. This to them seemed like Jennifer was hiding something. Jennifer was quick to come to her own defense though, and said that she just genuinely doesn't remember anything about that night after about 2:30 a.m. She doesn't even remember sleeping in the hallway or being taken back to her room in a wheelchair. Now, sure, her actions were questionable, but there's just no evidence that she was in the room when George was attacked or when he accidentally fell, or any evidence that she knew anything about it. I also don't think a $1 million settlement is too suspicious. I mean, yes, it's a relatively small amount of money considering that George was likely murdered, but trying to prove that the cruise company was somehow liable would be pretty difficult. And when you add on top a severe lack of evidence and the grief that Jennifer was almost certainly experiencing, I just don't think a $1 million payout was too crazy. The Smith family also pointed fingers at the Turkish investigators, who were very vague about sharing information regarding the case with George's family. With all this in mind, the Smith family hired forensic scientist Henry Lee to help find answers to the haunting and jarring questions related to what happened to their son. Even though all of the evidence was gone at that point, Henry managed to conduct several tests in the cabin, and just by looking at the balcony and the railing height, he was certain that George's fall was not accidental. Someone had to have pushed George forcefully for him to fall over that railing. But he also couldn't rule out the fact that maybe George was just too inebriated to really take into account what he was doing, and he lost his balance and went overboard, which explains the peculiar location of the chair and the hip mark on the glass. People do crazy stuff when they're drunk, and falling out of an open window has happened many times in the past with drunk people. But while this is certainly plausible, I, along with pretty much anyone else who's researched this case, tends to believe there's a lot more to the story than a simple accidental fall. To confirm one theory or the other, Henry wanted to recreate the fall both ways with the help of a dummy to check the smear patterns found on the ship's canopy. But this is where Royal Caribbean International intervened and said they would not allow it, leaving George's very confusing case hanging in the balance yet again. Frustratingly, Henry's findings in the case were confidential and were never made public, so we don't know what Henry uncovered when he analyzed the cabin and the balcony. All the while, the FBI was focused on the four men, Josh, Greg, Zach, and Rusty. But that investigation also went nowhere because of a lack of evidence. The Smith family did eventually cross Jennifer off their suspect list, and in the end, the lawsuit against the cruise company was settled for a slightly higher amount of $1.3 million, which was divided among the Smiths and Jennifer. The FBI continued the investigation until 2015, when it was finally decided that there wasn't enough evidence to carry this investigation forward, and George's death was ruled as an accident. The case was closed on January 7, 2015, almost 10 years after George had disappeared. As of this decision, Josh, Zach, Greg, and Rusty are not suspects or even people of interest anymore. The FBI, Turkish authorities, or anyone for that matter, doesn't know where George's body may be. In an ocean that covers 70% of the planet, and to add to that 20 years since George disappeared, the chances of finding his body were and still are next to none. The Smith family was outraged and disgusted by this decision by the FBI. They said in a Facebook post that they were planning to take George's case to the New York jurisdiction of the FBI, and rightfully so because they need answers. But we have to keep in mind, all of the evidence is just gone, and that sucks. As for Jennifer, she remarried a few years later in 2009 and has devoted her life to charity work and now has 2 children. The case of George Smith IV has officially been labeled an accident, but no one, myself included, believes that story. No one truly knows whether George accidentally fell over the balcony or was pushed by one of those men, or something else entirely. But this is a very unsettling and tragic case that even after almost 20 years, the Smith family is still looking for answers to. They know nothing will bring George back, but they desperately want something done so that they can find some level of closure. The fact that George's body isn't and cannot be recovered adds a whole other layer of pain and suffering. My heart very genuinely goes out to the Smith family, who are spending every hour of their days in uncertainty, trying to fight for answers. We can only hope that they can find some semblance of peace, even though it's nearly impossible when they just don't know what happened to their son. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Saya Eschhaus and Mel Van Oosten. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it is a great way to support the channel and help out. And I really appreciate those of you that have decided to do that. If you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find the link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also now available, and you can grab one of those from the link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.